Hello, welcome to Fiberchats, and my guest today is Elizabeth Williamson. Welcome.
Hi.
You've been born and raised in Shetland, right?
Yes.
And then you ended up in Australia somehow. How did that happen?
I met my husband in Shetland. He came to work there. He only came for a few weeks, but he ended up staying 3 years, a wife, a baby, and then we finally managed to leave. So we went out to Australia in 2006.
Okay. How was it for you, like going away from Shetland and being in the new place with the new baby, new husband, and all that things?
It was very different because obviously I had lived up until that point in Shetland, and we moved to rural and remote Australia. So it wasn't like we went to somewhere like Melbourne or Sydney. We went to the middle of nowhere. So it was a steep learning curve. It was very different from home. Even just obviously temperature. No, so it was hard at first, but we stayed there for a very long time, so we enjoyed it in Australia.
Right. And how was like you brought your knitting with you, right?
Yes, I
And
did.
did that help with the adjustment? Did that help with like keeping sane in the new surrounding, new environment?
I did, but initially I didn't do much knitting when we got there because it really was too hot
Right.
to knit. And all Australians will know that the heat and knitting and the heat in your hands. So I then at that point, my mother bought me bamboo needles,
Right.
and that just revolutionized. So I had then bamboo and then also wooden needles makes a huge difference. And I've never gone back to knitting on metal needles.
That's so interesting. I didn't realize that it makes difference in hot climates.
I found because your hands are hot.
Right.
So before I would knit, what I would do was I would run my wrists under the cold water tap.
Am I-
It's like if you make pastry, you run your wrists under the cold water. So before I would knit, I would run my wrists under the cold water just to cool my hands.
Right.
And then if my hands got too hot, I would put it down and then do that again.
It's interesting. So talking about your mom, let's touch base about her. Because I always see like you teach classes together. I see pictures of you together. I see you referencing her a lot. And of course, she's an amazing lace knitter herself. Was she the one who taught you how to knit? Do you remember learning how to knit?
No. So it's a story that is very common with Shetlanders is
Right.
that I have no recollection of learning to knit. So my mum tells me that I was probably about three-ish when I learnt to knit. So she taught me, but then everybody else is knitting around you. So you want to do what everybody else is doing. So I don't remember. I used to say I learnt to knit lace when I was about 10,
Okay.
but then I just posted on Instagram a little pattern that I found that obviously I had written down, but I couldn't spell.
So it might have been before 10.
Or I had really bad spelling at 10, or it was I learned to knit lace before then.
Right.
But no, I don't remember learning to knit. But I think that's common in Shetland.
Right.
People
Do you
just,
remember any of your earliest projects?
oh, I have some of them. I kept them. My mum kept some of my earliest projects. I've got a little dress that I made for my doll. I've got a Fair Isle little purse. And she kept these things for us. So now I actually have those. So no, because obviously we when I was at school, we were taught to knit. So you
Right.
had a knitting teacher that would come in every week, and so it was an important part of the curriculum and life in Shetland. So everybody was taught how to knit at school.
Right. Was that inspiring or intimidating to have like the whole island neat?
I don't. It's what I don't think it was intimidating. I think it's just everybody does it, and everybody has their own area of expertise. Like my granny, my mum's mum, she obviously she knitted Fair Isle mostly, but then that's at that point is what people, that was demand, and she sold it in the speed. It was just amazing. She didn't look at her hands, and she just, and the patterns would just flow. She wasn't following a pattern, it was in her head, and she would talk and direct the traffic and what to do and everything, and just continue to knit. And that always fascinated me when I was younger, was just the intelligence of the women, just to remember all the patterns and everything else. Because there's, when I knit, there's me, I've got my marker, my pen to tick off the rows, make sure where I'm at. But they would just knit, and it was all, they just memorized these patterns.
Right. No, it's actually really mind-blowing because, and also the ability to read lace or to read the Fair Isle, like they can just look at something and like replicate it without any problem. Like they know every stitch and they can just like read it like a book, you know? So to me, this is like amazing ability.
No, it is. It's in the stuff that the women knitted, in the like the Shetland Museum and in other places. It is amazing what they did do without it being written down.
Right, right. Did your mom ever write down any knitting patterns?
Oh, she writes down more now than she used to do, but I think that's might be because then it's
Or
more
influence?
reference, and now it is that you write and chart things. She doesn't write it long-handed. We all just chart
Right.
patterns, and that was when I was started up doing lace again. My mother was like, you have to learn how to chart it, because that's really important, and then you can see what you're knitting because you can visualize it, and it's a big part. And I taught a few people to knit, and they've gone, oh, I can't do charts. And I've gone, you have to learn to do charts, because then you know what you're making
Right.
is what's on the paper, because you know where to position the holes, so you can tell if you're on the next row, if the hole is misplaced, you can see it as
Right.
you knit it. Whereas
I
if it's
actually
written
like
longhand,
I have this experience with a lot of knitters when I'm like trying to convince people to try lace. They would tell me I just don't do charts. And the funny part that I find it impossible to follow the written instructions for lace because it's just so confusing to me. But like when you see the chart, like even the most complicated chart, it's easy because like you can already predict, like at some point you're getting to the point when like you know what's coming to the entire row, you know, so it's like you just glance at the row and you have it in your head basically, you know, so it's actually like deceptively, it seems difficult, but in reality it's much easier to follow the chart than to follow written instructions.
I completely agree. Because also, obviously, in the traditional Shetland way, was everything was just a two together,
Right.
which made things much faster to knit. But now we do the slip slip knit, which to me, when you're trying, if you're thinking, especially like say the tree, it's a pattern, but because you've got the slope, you know when I'm knitting it this way, it's going to go that side, and then it's going to go that side, and you can see where the holes are, so you can automatically know what you're doing by looking at the picture, and you know which of the two together you should be doing,
Right.
because then you've got the leans in the correct direction. And I
Right.
think that's the difference with the older Shetland patterns, because it's the two together. Sometimes the tree doesn't quite sit
With the
in the
right
same
way.
way, yeah,
Right.
in it now. But then that was to do with the same, a lot of, because Shetland lace at that point wasn't really for wearing, it was produced for selling.
Right. So the
So
faster you can knit it, the more you can sell basically.
yeah, and also if you think about what it's like in, well, I find at night time when you're knitting, especially if you're knitting dark colored, it's very difficult to see.
Right.
So women used to have the knitting that they used to just do by the fireside, and they would have different knitting in different places in the house. So that way, where the light was better, they would knit there were one person who used to knit at the top of the stairs because they had a light there, and so she could see better. So you'd find women would have different knitting, not just for different times a day, but different knitting for different places in the house that they could
So
see.
fascinating.
Yeah.
It's funny that you mentioned that because I live in a fairly large house, and yet there is only one window where I can knit Shetland lace by because it has this northern exposure with like indirect light, just perfect daylight, and it's like my favorite spot to knit Shetland lace next to. you know. So I can
The,
totally see that, you know.
but that was I did that thing on Instagram. Was that in February? You had to post every day, and it was like your favorite spot or something. And I took a picture of the sofa where I sit to knit, because that's the same way. It's got the best light in the house
Right,
for knitting, and that's where you'll find me. That's where I do it. But it's not good at night time.
right.
But during the day, that's the nicest place to knit because it's got the light so you can see.
Do you feel like when you moved to Australia that you started appreciating the whole Shetland heritage more and you started like, did you miss it terribly? Did it become like more important for you to keep it going?
Yes and no. I always felt that it was important, but it was that connection to home,
Right,
knitting things, and also I was then of an age that I appreciated more, because I think when you're in it, everybody does it. It's just that's just life, and that's Shetland, and we all knit and we all produce things. But when you move yourself away from there, then it is that little connection with home
right,
that you have. And it was when we went to live in Papua New Guinea for a little while, and it was really nice to be able to teach some of the children there how to knit and crochet, and just have that skill set that you can then teach people and give the children something to do. And
right.
it was just bringing Shetland to Papua New Guinea, bizarrely.
So let's talk about you teaching. What was like, when was the first time you taught somebody how to knit, or like when did you give the first class?
Oh, I can't remember the first time. I've taught various children to knit over the years, and that was my first time in Papua New Guinea, was teaching teenagers to knit. And then when I got back to Australia, there's not, because we were living in tropical Australia, there are not very many knitters,
Right,
but there were a few people who obviously showed an interest. And so I think that was the first time that I really taught an adult how to knit. And then now moving to England, I started doing some workshops and some classes. And sadly, because of COVID, then it all came to a halt. But
right.
now it started up again. So I'm doing some in a local shop art gallery here. And I'm doing classes, workshops with them there. So that's kind of all starting over again. So it's quite exciting to be
Right.
involved in it.
Um, there was this conversation I had with Hazel Tyndall, and I want to ask your opinion on that. So, I belong to the Find Shetland Lace group on Facebook
Mm-hmm.
that Monique Boonstra organized. And
Mm-hmm.
we had that whole discussion there of what you can call a proper Shetland lace. So, some people were saying, unless it's done with Shetland wool in Shetland by a Shetlander, it's not really, you could not call it Shetland lace. It can be like something in style of Shetland, but you cannot claim it to be Shetland lace. What's your feeling about it? Just because you moved out of Shetland and you obviously continued to knit Shetland lace through your life. What do you think about that?
It's an interesting discussion, and they spoke about that at it was at a Shetland Wool Week or something. They had a conversation on all the elements that could be needed to be fulfilled to be Shetland lace, like you say, Shetland wool, Shetlander, in Shetland, Shetland motifs. And yeah, the list could go on. And how many of those criteria do you need to meet to call it Shetland lace? So it is, and a lot of people feel very strongly about what the definition is. And I suppose I do use when I have been designing and naming my patrons and things, because obviously I've named my patrons from the area I come from. So I'm giving them Shetland names, I'm using Shetland motifs, but then some people might say they're not Shetland because they're not being made with Shetland wool and they're not being made in Shetland. So it's a big discussion with lots of facets to it.
Right. I mean, my like, yeah, obviously, I'm not a Shetlander from Shetland or an expert in Shetland lace, but I feel like because it's endangered now, because it's officially became on the red list of endangered crafts, the more people can knit it, the more people can learn it, and the more people design it, the better it is.
That's what I've really, it's the workshops I do, I say the Shetland lace workshops because I'm teaching Shetland lace. And I just want to, I love knitting. I love designing. I love speaking about Shetland lace. And I'm quite passionate about not letting it die out, in that the more people we can involve or get interested in it, it keeps it going.
Right.
And so I'm being very pleased being asked to teach Shetland lace classes at Shetland Wool Week this year. So I'm really excited about that, because then I can talk more about Shetland knitting.
Right. Do you teach classes with your mom together? I thought I saw some classes that you've taught together, no?
No, we haven't. My mum just happened to be here when some of my workshops were on, so I dragged her along to the workshop. She's not. My mum doesn't like the spotlight, I would say. So she's very. But I dragged her along to the classes with me, and she did enjoy them. And people, because she's obviously got a lot of knowledge, and that's the thing about knitting. You can never claim, I think you can't claim ever to be an expert at it, because I learn new things all the time. And that's what I always say to people. I'm not an expert, because we learn new techniques and new things all the time with knitting.
Right.
There's always something new to learn or new to do or something to experiment with. Or so it's really, obviously, if you're Anne Hyunson, and they've got expert knowledge as well. But I'm not there. But she's got a lot of knowledge that.
Well, I mean, I feel like it's like learning a new language, you feel like you understand what's going on and you feel like you're fluent, but then some new word comes up and you don't know it. So it's
Yeah.
like something like lifelong learning always. So I feel like lace is just another language, and you learn it all your life also.
Yes, and Shetlanders obviously have different words for things that can cause confusion when doing knitting patterns. Then we have our own terminology, as I think is it they have a bag that has all the different names for things on it that what we call like wusset and wires and things like that.
Right. I mean, it's sort of like, I don't want to use the word cute, but it's sort of like this endearing to keep this old, language and like all those terms alive, and like it just gives certain flavor, it makes it more authentic.
Well, that was the thing when I was teaching the girls in Papua New Guinea. They were being introduced to a whole new
Vocabulary.
language. It wasn't just English. It was also they were finding out different things. Different words that we call, because I just out of habit, I just would use, instead of your knitting needles, I would say your wires.
Right.
But that's just because it's ingrained into me.
Right. Do you use the knitting belt?
I used to use the knitting belt, but I have to say that I have transitioned more onto circular wires, because I find that the shawls that I have been producing and making, there is so many loops on them that I mostly use circular. but I used to always use a knitting belt before, but I haven't, and because it's a whole different technique
Right.
of using a knitting belt, and how you hold how you hold the yarn and needles and everything else from a knitting belt to using circular. So I've moved away from using the knitting belt to circular, but that's just mainly because the number of
Stitches. Right.
the stitches that you have on your needle at one time, that you can't, because my mum was here and she uses a knitting belt, and she was making a Shetland hat, but when she put it down and she'd pick it up, she kept losing stitches off the end.
Right.
And she'd just go, oh, it's fine, and just pick them up. But whereas I would go, and would find that quite distressing to lose loops under the end.
This is like, for me, this is my worst nightmare, when those stitches start running in different directions, screaming away, you know. That's like, that stresses me out.
Well, my children know not to talk to me if I'm trying to fix something. When you've said, because I use a lot of yarns that have like silk in them, so they can be quite slippery. And when they go quickly, and my children know not to talk to me because I'm concentrating.
I know the first time I was crafting the Shetland lace that I was knitting, I was like, don't even breathe in my direction. Like, don't look at me, don't talk, don't even think about me. Like, I'm not here. It requires my complete concentration, you know.
Well, I did post a picture on Instagram of myself, and I'm concentrating, because that lace knitting, you do a lot of counting stitches.
Right.
1, 2, and then my husband will shout in a random 17, 24. So I posted a bit, and obviously I was really cross, and my face is just as if he'd shouting random numbers at me, and then took a picture of the concentration that I was at that moment in time.
Right. Is he very supportive of your knitting? Like, does he find it like supportive of Shetland heritage and all that stuff?
He's very supportive, and he encourages me to do my knitting, and he is quite knowledgeable himself now on knitting and knitting patterns from having to listen to me.
Does he knit, or he is knowledgeable in theory?
Knowledgeable in theory. No, he hasn't done knitting, but he's from England, so they don't have that same heritage as being taught at school.
Right. Do your kids knit?
Well, I have taught them all to knit, but none of them do knit, because obviously it's not for them. It doesn't happen quick enough.
Right. Let's talk about your designs. When did you start? Like, when did you decide to publish your first design? What was it? How was it received?
Oh, because I only just started recently publishing my designs. I have to say, my mum encouraged me to do them, and my friends around me encouraged me to start publishing them, because I suppose I was just making them up and that, so, and giving them away as presents and gifts and things, and somebody said, well, I should try and actually sell some of them. So it is just being a recent thing that I have just started doing. So I have found they've been well received. So it's quite encouraging that people like what I'm doing. So.
And the shawl that you're wearing now, this is your latest design?
Yes, I just published it now. So I've got quite a few I've been making. So I've got a few that I haven't published yet. So this one I've just been working on recently, and I do quite like it. So, but then I make them and then I wear them.
Right, and we talked about it a little bit, because there was this whole discussion of like, when I was interviewing Hazel Tyndall, she said that probably every house in Shetland have a chest where there is lace stored, but nobody is wearing it, because where would you wear it? But you wear your lace all the time, right?
I do wear my lace all the time. And it also, from moving from Australia back to England, I have found it quite cold. And that's probably a strange thing for a Shetlander to say, but I have found it quite cold moving back to the UK. And so every day I'll have a scarf on of some kind, and obviously I have a box full of different shapes, colours, sizes. And one of the children at school said to me the other day, "Mrs. Williamson, it's so hot and you still have a scarf on." But no, I do wear them all the time. But that's, people will wear a normal, like a woolen scarf or a and I just wear my lace scarves, and I wear them at night time. And I found when we lived in Australia, when you would go from being really hot outside and you would go into air conditioned houses or buildings, it was always really handy in your handbag, because Shetland shawls squish quite small, don't they?
Yeah, they don't weigh anything and they don't
No.
stay, so you can just always just have them in your person.
So I would have them and then wrap them round, and then one of my friends, I made her a shawl, and she wears it every time that she goes to the cinema because it's really cold. So
And they're quite warm. They really do help to keep you warm. They seem very thin and everything, but somehow this is like this extra layer makes all
yes,
the difference.
yeah, and I do, and I suppose that I just think that I suppose they're like jewelry, isn't it? People wear beautiful brooches or necklaces, and I suppose my accessory of me is obviously my shawls.
Right. Um, do you miss anything, like one thing, like if you have to think about like what you miss from home, from Shetland, like food wise or tradition wise or anything, like what would it be?
I have to admit that the thing that I miss the most is what we in Shetland would call muckle biscuits. They're called big biscuits. They are produced by a bakery in Baltusund in Unst, and wherever I've gone, my father is a wonderful man, and I have been all around Australia into Papua New Guinea, and he sent me boxes of these biscuits.
Oh, that's so sweet.
He sends me, and then I'll phone him up and they'll go, "I'm running out of biscuits," and he will send me a new box of biscuits. So there's, if you look on my Instagram, there's pictures of I have pictures of my big biscuits all around Australia, and even in Papua New Guinea he managed to send me a box of biscuits.
That's so amazing. Um, do you did you stay, so you stayed in touch this whole time? Like, was it very important for you to stay in touch with like people from Shetland? I mean, not just your family, but like friends.
Yeah, I've kept up, but as time has gone on I haven't managed to keep up with people so well. And in obviously being in Australia, it's hard to visit, and I haven't managed to be home since 2016.
Right.
We moved back to the UK in 2019, but due to COVID, we haven't managed to go home, and I am going home, fingers crossed, on Sunday. So I'm very excited about going home.
So nice. I'm gonna be looking forward to the pictures from Shetland.
So very, very, very excited to be going actually up to the islands,
Right.
because it is a place that I miss a lot, and that was one of the reasons moving back to the UK, so we would be obviously nearer nearer home, and it's been a long time before actually getting there.
Right. Besides knitting, so you mentioned you also crochet.
Yes.
Do you do any other fiber arts?
No, I was taught how to sew when we were in Australia, because obviously I felt a gap. So when I got to Australia first, I had that, when I would normally be knitting, I had that, it was just too hot. And so I was taught by a lovely woman there how to sew. So I did, I learned to do some like hand stitching and machine sewing and everything else.
Right.
So, but I haven't done any of that, because I have to admit, since I figured out how to knit in the heat. Sometimes it was even knitting just opposite the air conditioner. Sitting there in the direct path of the aircon and knitting. Then I haven't, since coming back, I haven't done any more. I do crochet things, little things, but no, I have been focusing mostly now on my knitting, which I really enjoy doing.
Right. Do you have any favorite yarn? Do you like prefer to knit with Shetland wool, or do you have any other favorites outside of Shetland?
What I have, because the last two designs I have done, and the one that's behind me is actually an American company called The Unique Sheep, and they've got a lovely yarn, and they do amazing colours in gradients, and so I have used quite a few of their wools, and I love the blue brick. It's a Canadian. The lady dyes these absolutely beautiful gradient wools, and I've used quite a few of their wools as well, because it's lovely to experiment with other yarns,
Right.
and having, especially those with the different gradients in them, because with lace you need the patterns and also the colors. It makes a huge difference, because if the color's too much, you lose the pattern. But so in other patterns, they link themselves to. I knitted one with I've forgotten what it's called, but it's from the blue brick. I've forgotten the name of the color, but it blends from like a white to a dark blue. And I did it in like a wavy stitch, so it looks like if it's the sea.
Right.
And that's just, I love that shawl that I made in that, because it just, for me, it reminded me of home in the sea.
Right.
And you get in that with wools, isn't it? You can look at wool and you can just in your head go, it reminds you of something, and then you want to make it to it's like got a story behind it, if you know what I mean.
So when you design, do you first look at the yarn and then come up with the idea for the design, or do you have how do you find your inspirations?
Both ways. Sometimes I see a yarn and I go, oh, that would look amazing, and that one I've just spoken about, and that'll look. And other ones that I have an idea in my head, and then I've even had people specially dye wool for me, because I have a pattern and I have an idea, but I can't find what I want in my head in the colorways. So then I've asked people to specially dye me colors, so I can achieve what's in my head and how I visualize something's going to be. So it's both ways work, and that's, you get inspiration from many things.
Right. Do you
And
have a favorite shape of of a shawl that you like gravitate towards?
I have made quite a few crescent shaped shawls, and I found that shape probably, I like that shape because when you drape it over you, it sits beautifully on your shoulders. You don't really have to pin it on, and it's not, if you make a rectangle shawl, they always seem to be so much fabric. Where crescent shawls, just they have that, they can sit on your shoulders. And also I've made them specifically to go with items of clothing. So I have like a dress that I'm going to wear, or I've got a dress that I really like, and I know that will look beautiful when I go out. It will sit nicely. So I do like crescent shawls.
Right. So how many designs do you have published so far?
I only think I've got about 6 or 7 published
And
so
how
far.
many ideas for future designs you have?
I have just even sitting in a box beside me. I've got about 4 or 5 that I haven't published yet.
Right. Does it take you a while to like be satisfied with how the pattern is written and how the charts look like? Are you very controlling and like hands-on when it comes to it? Do you use testers? How does the process works for you to publish it?
Um, because I never used to do it because I used to just and I think you can see that sometimes when you look at shawls that's in the museum, or in certainly in older shawls, women probably just started, and you can see where they probably changed their mind, and you can see
Right.
it developing in the knitting. But now I have to say I do knit swatches of things, and you'll see I'll do a lace edge, and there'll be lots of different. I go, no, don't like that one, try next one. Don't like that one, try that one. Don't like that one, try next one. And so I'm much more now. I've just knitted a shawl, and I like that there's connections. So I've done a lace middle, and then I've done a little border,
Mm-hmm.
and then I've done a lace aging, but I've taken elements out of the middle into the border, and from the border into the lace age that I haven't, the lace age I've not seen before, but I've made it up because I wanted it to match and have that link.
Right.
I like things that link together. So now I'm much more fussy, and I spend a lot of time thinking and trying to get it right and put it together. And then if I don't like how it sits together, we'll then try something else. So I do. So it takes a little while now to do the planning and the thinking, and then the knitting and the trying it out.
Right. Do you find it difficult to teach Shetland lace just because it's so time consuming to actually knit it?
Well, the times I've done it before, in the workshops that I have just done recently, what I've been doing is little like actual Shetland motifs. So on Instagram, you'll see I have a picture, I think there's of 9 different of the motifs, and they start with the easy kind of cat's paw, and then or owl shell, and then you move on to more complex and introduce different stitches and complexity, and that way people can progress. Because sometimes I think people find it intimidating, like your story, how you just started knitting. It amazed me. I thought, wow, because most people, like, we were taught to knit owl shell,
Right.
not bird's eye.
Well, that's what Anne Yunson said. That
Yeah,
mom
exactly,
wanted,
it's
she's like,
amazing.
her mom wanted to learn bird's eye, so she just like went and tried to learn it from the teacher who knew it. So,
Yeah, see, that's amazing. Whereas we were taught, first of all, owl shell, and then that then progressed on to the next. So that's what I've done in the workshops, is just you start with the owl shell or cat's paw, and then you move on, and then you learn more stitches, and that way introducing different 3 togethers, and just how to recognize placement and everything else. So that's what I've done in my workshops, just because I want to give people confidence that they can do it, because I know there's nothing worse than trying something and you can't get it done, and it's too, because then people will then go, oh, I don't like this because it's too hard or whatever. And I want people to enjoy knitting as much as I enjoy knitting, and have the same pleasure as I get when you produce something and you go, oh, that's I love that, or that looks really good, or, and then people will make something. And a lady that I taught how to lace in Australia, she sends me now pictures of things that she's made, and it's amazing, and it's just wonderful to see.
right. Did you meet a lot of knitters in Australia that like, did you make a lot of connections in the knitting world in Australia?
No, because we lived up in the tropical north of Australia, and so there weren't very many knitters around. And at that point, I wasn't as active on Facebook or Instagram or anything like that. And so I didn't meet very many, although I do know there's a lot of lace knitters around Australia. But at the time when we were there, I didn't. But we moved around an awful lot. We were never in one place for very
Right.
long. So we were, with my husband's work, we were 6 months here, 6 months here, 6 weeks somewhere.
Right.
And so we were all over the place for a while.
Do you find that the Instagram and Facebook made a difference for you personally during COVID?
Uh, I I don't think so. I think actually during COVID time, having the children home and homeschooling and everything else, actually it was just so busy with that that actually I spent less time on Facebook and less time knitting, and it was, I've got three children, so it was very full on all of a sudden having them all back home again, and being back to homeschooling, something I didn't think I would ever have to do again.
So how did you get invited to be an instructor in Shetland Wool Week, and what class are you going to teach there this year?
So I got contacted by Shetland Wool Week and asked if I would do some classes. So I'm going to do some same Shetland motifs, just the classic motifs, and we're going to do them online. And I'm also going to do offering a class on how to knit on a lace edge
Oh, that's
to shawls, because that's obviously something that people do find um, challenging, or they're not sure about it. I've seen on not Instagram, Facebook, somebody had posted the other day going with a pattern going, I don't understand this. And it's how when you finish the main body of a shawl, how to cast on and then knit on. So you know, don't break the yarn and you continue to knit the edge on. And so that was because there's obviously different techniques on knitting a lace edge on, but it can make such a difference. Like the one behind me, you've got the main body, and then when you knit that lace on, it just makes, sometimes I think it finishes off shawls beautifully.
It does. It's like it's fine because I was just talking to a friend of mine about this shawl I was knitting, and I was like, it missing the edge. Like it's to me, it's just missing this edging. Like the pretty lace edging would make all the difference, you know. So I
Yeah,
feel like it really does finish it.
because the shawl that I've just published is a rectangular shawl, but I didn't put a lace agent on it because I just loved the simplicity of the middle, and I just did a garter aging all the way around it because the middle is just, I love the middle, and I didn't want to detract from that. But a lot of the time, you're right. And I think that's might be because that's what we're used to seeing,
Right.
is the amazing shawls, and they usually have a lace agent on them. But the different techniques, obviously, a lot of time people would knit the lace and then pick up and then knit up and knit. Although I do find it easier
To do it at
to
the same time
to do it afterwards.
or afterwards.
I do, and then it's just you pick up and then you knit all the way around
Right.
the
I
edge.
remember the first time I did the edging where I had to pick up and then like do the corners. So the corners were calling for the wrap and turn, and I was just freaking out. I was like, I couldn't wrap my head around wrap and turn. Like because when you read it, it's really sort of sounds confusing. But then when I actually came to it and I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna do like one sentence at a time. Like I'm just gonna literally follow the instructions. And it actually turned out to be super simple.
Yeah.
But to do the description of like that's what I find difficult about pattern writing because you have to explain it in a way that any novice who like never done it would understand and be able to do it. Do you find that difficult? Do you find that part difficult?
Well, what I do is I send it to people that I know, and then they read it and go, this doesn't make sense, or you need to give more information here. So I get other people to test knit bits of the pattern, or
Right.
I get people to read the instructions. Sometimes it's just correcting my English, which isn't, can't spell Elizabeth. So obviously it's ongoing since I was small.
Since 10, yeah.
There'll be a typo somewhere. I don't think you mean this, and you read it back and you go, oh nope, I didn't mean that. But it's, so I get people to read them for me and go through them before they're published, but there'll probably still be, like anyone, there'll be mistakes sometimes in them. But no, because I think, because you know what you mean when you're writing patterns,
Right.
and it's hard, and it's good. I give it to people who know how to knit well, and I give it to somebody that's only started to learn to knit recently, and then that way you've got somebody who's a beginner in lace knitting, and if they tell me that doesn't make sense, it would be better if you do this or this, and then because they might see it differently than the person who obviously has more experience because they know what I mean.
Right.
Yes, because you forget what people don't know, that you just take it as information that you already know and it's just been there for a very long time. Then you don't remember that people don't know that. Does that make sense? You've
Right.
got just
What's obvious to you is not obvious to everybody.
yes, and that's the difference, isn't it? And it's like cultural heritage. It's just having that, growing up around knitting, and everybody around you, if picking up, as soon as you sat down, people would pick up knitting. Wherever, if people came to visit you, they would bring the knitting with them.
Right.
So it was always, people were always around you, and just people talking about wool, talking about construction and all that stuff, just osmosis, it just goes in, I think. But, I was really, really lucky to grow up and have that as part of my heritage.
Does it feel very special for you to be coming back as an instructor at Shetland Wool Week?
Yes, it does, and it's lovely to have been asked, and I'm just very excited about it because, like I said, I just love knitting, and I'm passionate about knitting, and the more people that enjoy it, the better. So I love sharing all about the lace knitting and everything else. So it does feel very special, because that's one of the things that, so we had the pro and con lists for moving back to the UK, and I have to say Shetland Wool Week was high on the list of things for coming back home for. And so it was really, obviously with COVID being very disappointing that it's been cancelled. And I know, and I've met quite a lot of people around where I live now who have been up to Shetland Wool Week, and it's obviously it's a massive, it's been huge for Shetland, and it's been such a wonderful thing.
Right.
for
It's
for
interesting that
Shetland.
like every Shetlander that I interviewed, I asked them the same question. I said, like, how do you think Shetland Wool Week changed Shetland? And I wasn't necessarily expecting everybody to be enthusiastic about it just because it brings like so many people, tourists, and it's probably like tiring for the locals to have all this like new crowd coming in and like asking the same questions and like, wanting to know the same things. But they were all so lovely and like so enthusiastic about it, and everybody said it's like it makes such a difference, and it made like huge difference for Shetland.
Yeah. And I know that my mother, who takes part in Wool Week, by the end of Wool Week, she's absolutely exhausted,
Right.
but has had a wonderful time. But then she also really enjoys talking to people, meeting people, and talking about knitting. And my mum spins, and it's just meeting like-minded people who are enthusiastic and are interested in, and we all enjoy that, don't we, when we
Right, right.
you
Have
can
you
talk
ever
to
tried
people.
spinning?
Yes, I have tried spinning, but I haven't done it in years. My mother taught me how to spin, and then as an adult, I went to spinning night classes again, but I haven't taken up. My mother spins amazing yarns and thin yarns to knit. She's got a project in mind at the moment, and she spun the yarn for it. So that's going to be very exciting. I've seen the charts
Right.
for it. So
So you get to see the preview before it's even done, just in the idea stage.
yes, and she's spun the yarn for it. So no, I've not got. It is something that I would like to do, but I think when maybe when my children leave home, I might have some time and some spare time to do. That's the thing. When I remember when my children were smaller, I would take my knitting to the play park. So when they were playing and I'd be knitting, and this little child came up to me and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm knitting." And they went, "But only grannies knit." And that's the thing. I also want, and that's another thing, is a lot of people who've met me and I say I've knitted what I'm wearing, because obviously people see what I have on and they say, "Oh, that's lovely," and then I say I made it, and people, and that's to bring it down to a younger generation, that, because I think that's the thing, lots of people do have that idea that it is only
Right.
and it would be nice to get some younger people, so that the Pirimakers in Shetland is just lovely, to get that young people again knitting in
Right.
Shetland, to keep that skills alive is just amazing. I think it's such a great project that they've got going.
When you design, do you ever design with beginners in mind?
Yes, so the thing, the shawl I've got on at the moment was because somebody had pointed out to me that some of my shawls were complicated, or certainly of when they're patterned and they're actually knitted lace, so they're patterned every row. And I took that on board, and so I had yarn left over from knitting Hydra that I've just published,
Mhm.
and I had yarn left over, and so I thought, well, actually, the diamond motif with the, as we call them, muckle holes, the large holes, lace holes, and I love that motif, and it was in something that my mum showed me. It was an old shawl, and I went, "Oh, I really love that pattern. So what if I make them little, and then bit bigger, and then bit bigger, and bit bigger, in that way, that same as learning to knit lace, you start with an easy pattern and it gets harder as you progress. So rather than doing a different pattern through the shawl, just do the same pattern but make it that progression,
Right.
and then just with the garter stitch, the whole shawl on garter stitch. In that way, people then progress through it to it's not a hard pattern, but hopefully it looks.
Right. Well, I can't wait to see pictures from Wool Week, and
Yeah.
I hope you'll tell me how it went, and I hope you have wonderful time home with your mom at the
Oh,
Wool Week.
yes.
And thank you so very much for being my guest today. It was
It's been
great to
lovely
get
to
to know
meet
you.
you. Yes, it's been lovely to speak to you.
Yeah.